When you go back into the philosophy of ideas and the history of ideas, one thing that you'll find is there's been a lot of discussion about ideals. There's been the talk about the ideal of justice, the ideal of equality, the religious ideals, and so forth. But we have to step back and ask ourselves, just what is this ideal? We don't see ideals in the world. What is it? Well, it's a mental picture in our minds of the way we think something ought to be. It includes all the properties of the perfect whatever we're trying to imagine. And for every individual object that exists, if this is the actual object, there's a tension between that and the ideal if it's not a perfect object. Most things are not in the world. So this tension, in this example, we have the example of Parthenon in Greece, between the way it actually is now and the ideal that it used to be many years ago. That tension between the actual object and the ideal is can be described by field theory. It's similar to the tension between the north and south pole of a magnet. In the late 1800s, there was a man named Michael Faraday, and he talked about two poles and there being a tension between those. The two poles, that's often referred to as being bipolar. And the tension between them is what field theory talks about. And this is very similar to the tension that exists between actual objects and their ideal. Now we can reduce the tension between an actual object and its ideal by taking action. This action needs to be massive. Anybody can take a little action. It needs to be organized. It needs to be intelligent. Dumb action's not going to get us closer to the ideal, but intelligent action will. And it needs to be executed according to a plan, otherwise we lose our focus. Now, the tension between actual objects and their ideal applies to everything in the universe, and also it applies to our individual self, metaphorically. In fact, I think this is the strongest source of tension in ourselves. And by strongest, I don't mean the most intense. What I mean is it's the most enduring over the long term. When our basic needs are frustrated, these can become very intense temporarily, but over the long term, the tension between our actual self and our ideal is actually stronger. So we may blurt out something in anger because that some basic need has been frustrated temporarily, and say, "Oh, I hate you," or whatever. But then later on, we find that we're sorry and we apologize to the person. Or out of hunger, we may do something that is not in line with being our ideal self, but later on we realize we were not living up to our highest ideals. Or when we're sleepy and grumpy, we may temporarily do something that we would not normally do, and later on we regret it. Same with financial stress or sickness or illness or whatever. These things can temporarily override the strongest source of tension, but over the long haul, it's the tension between being our actual self and our ideal that is the most important and that we need to focus on.